Five Nights at Freddy's is streaming and in theaters, but will it jump scare its way into your heart? I'll tell you right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of the hotly anticipated movie adaptation of the game Five Nights at Freddy's, which is currently streaming on Peacock and also in theaters nationwide. It is an adaptation of the popular video game series directed by Emma Tammy, her third feature film. It's also co-written by Tammy, Seth Cuddeback, and Five Nights at Freddy's creator Scott Cawthon. Josh Hutcherson plays Mike, a desperate guardian to his little sister Abby, who takes a job as the night security guard at a dilapidated family fun restaurant called Freddy Fazbear's, but soon it becomes clear that his job isn't just to keep intruders out, but to deal with the current inhabitants, a group of animatronic characters that somehow come to life to menace anyone who crosses them. Elizabeth Lail plays Abby, a friendly police officer who also happens to have an intimate understanding of the restaurant's history. She's also apparently the least in-demand cop of all time, or there's no crime in the city, because she spends all of her time hanging around a closed-down restaurant without one call coming in over the radio. And Matthew Lillard rounds out the ensemble as Steve, the career counselor who sets Mike up with his job. Now, I knew going in that there would be some things about this movie that were lost on me because I've never played 1 second of Five Nights at Freddy's. I knew what the game was because I remember that it was one of the first games I'd heard of people watching other people play because people would live stream it. I knew that there were jump scares involved because that's what people like to watch. I knew the basic premise that it was something to do with a security guard and animatronic characters. But as far as the lore and all of that stuff, I was completely clueless other than just the basics. Now, given that the first game was released almost 10 years ago, I assumed that this movie would be aimed towards a bit of an older audience, but that's not the case. This is a PG-13 rated movie. I went to a 2 p.m. screening. It was the first screening that I could go to, and of the dozen or so people that were in attendance, I'd say half of them or more were kids 12 and under. So this is obviously a very younger skewing movie, much more than I'd originally anticipated. Now, I don't think you necessarily have to be an existing fan of something in order to enjoy the movie adaptation. For example, Harry Potter, Dune, even Taylor Swift just recently. These are things that I knew very little to nothing about going in, and yet I ended up enjoying the movie experience for all of those different things. So I was kind of looking forward to being introduced to what it is about Five Nights at Freddy's that everybody loves, because while I may not have played the game, I am a child of the 80s. My first few birthday parties were at Showbiz Pizza, which is what Five Nights at Freddy's is based on. It even predates Chuck E. Cheese. There was a big bear named Billy Bob, an animatronic bear. He'd say your name on stage when it was your birthday. It was a big deal. So in a way, even though I'm not a gamer as far as Five Nights at Freddy's goes, I was kind of primed to enjoy this movie adaptation. And as the credits rolled on the movie, I found that I was still in search of what it was that people liked about Five Nights at Freddy's and still in search of a great movie about killer animatronics, because this one, unfortunately for me, wasn't it. And listen, I'm not one of those guys that sits down in my chair and crosses my arms and says, well, I don't know what these kids like, but it better be impressive. I actually was very open to that crossover appeal because I think that that's great for a property to be able to be aimed at a younger audience but still accessible to an older one. And really my problem with the movie wasn't so much that it was aimed at younger kids, it's that I just didn't think the movie was that interesting. In a move that surprised me, Five Nights at Freddy's is painfully slow and incredibly boring. I love a good slow burn, but for that to work, the slow part has to be interesting and the payoff has to be worth it, and neither is true with this movie. I'd say a good 80 to 85% of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is devoted to Josh Hutcherson's family drama and trying to unwind this mystery from the past, these very slow scenes that don't really feed into anything or go anywhere. Maybe this is a deep lore thing that I just don't get because I didn't play the game, but even if I did play the game, I still don't necessarily know if I would like this approach. What you're seeing in the trailers with the characters and everything, that's maybe 20, 25 minutes of the runtime, and the rest is devoted to what I found to be this pretty lackluster family drama. And by the time we flash back to the same forest scene from Josh Hutcherson's past for the 8th or 9th time, I was like, come on, just solve this damn mystery already. And by the way, when you do have a plot that is somewhat of a mystery, but you've only introduced, let's say, 3 to 5 characters in the movie itself, it doesn't make the mystery that hard to figure out. You got to kind of expand your scope a little bit if you want to keep people guessing. The actors didn't really seem that interested either, because most of the cast sleepwalks through the movie, apart from Matthew Lillard, who I will say is at least attempting to do something. And then we have the animatronics at Freddy's. The design on them is fantastic. They look almost entirely or mostly practical. I read that the Jim Henson workshop was involved with this, but they do next to nothing of interest. There is precisely one sequence, at least before you get to the end of the movie, where the animatronics are hunting down and killing people, and I think delivering on what the movie is promising. And there is a kill in there that I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. However, this is a PG-13 movie, and you are constrained a little bit by that rating. You can't go as far as many horror fans would be expecting. And I understand that maybe the intention was not to include the established horror audience, but to go for an even younger crowd. But I will say, going back to the audience that I saw the movie with, as the credits rolled, there was a young kid, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years old, that immediately turned to their parents and said, well, that wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. And that was a 7-year-old saying that. Now, as with all movies that are based on popular properties, I'm sure that this is probably going to ignite a for the fans discussion. And yes, I'm sure that there are so many things that I didn't get, or references that I didn't understand, or maybe jokes that didn't land, because I'm not deep into the world of Five Nights at Freddy's. There were even some cameos from influencers that play Five Nights at Freddy's online. I recognized one of them, a very friendly and familiar face, but there were others I could tell that the people that know the game would probably recognize and appreciate. I get that. I don't need to get every reference, and ideally a movie like this will super serve your existing fan base and also bring new fans in. Well, as I mentioned, this movie didn't really win me over, and I will be very curious to see how the existing fan base feels about it, because I'm not quite sure it super served them either, apart from just surface references. The decision to make this movie almost entirely family drama centered was a curious one, especially at a runtime of about 1 hour and 45 minutes. And I feel like there was a really fun movie to be had here, even with the PG-13 rating, and the creative team just decided to not do that. And with the game's original creator credited as a screenwriter and reportedly heavily involved in the production, I don't think you can make the argument that this was something that was taken out of the hands of the people who know how to do it. It sounds like it was very much in the hands of the creator of the original game, and this was the movie that he wanted to deliver. Five Nights at Freddy's is also produced by Blumhouse, with Jason Blum credited as a producer, and after The Exorcist Believer, this is the second straight big franchise whiff from what I consider to be a pretty reliable name in horror. As Blumhouse is growing, I worry that it's becoming the very thing that it at one time was a refreshing break from, which is a studio that is pumping out cheap and disappointing films in order to make easy profits based off of existing IP. I hope that that's not the case. The third act for this movie comes to life with the promise of what the movie could have been, along with the one hunt and kill sequence, which I thought was all right. But otherwise, Five Nights at Freddy's was a slog to get through for me, which was actually disappointing for someone who wanted to sort of be initiated into this fandom. Perhaps superfans will feel differently, and I think that it'll probably be at least enjoyable for them on a, hey, I know that thing level, so that they can recognize references from the games. But for me, this movie lands squarely in not a fan territory. Not that it matters, because I don't think the people that are excited about this movie the most are going to listen to me or people like me, and I anticipate that people are going to turn out to see this movie in droves. I think Five Nights at Freddy's is going to make a lot of money, probably enough to justify a sequel, and all I can hope is that maybe the sequel to Five Nights at Freddy's will be the one that brings me on board. So those are my thoughts on Five Nights at Freddy's. As I mentioned, now streaming on Peacock and also available in theaters. What do you think? Are you going to be heading out to see it? Are you excited about this adaptation of the video game? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, stay tuned right here for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.